Many people ask, isn't fermentation and pickling, aren't they the same thing? Well, the answer is that most fermented foods are pickled, but not all pickles are fermented. So this chart, I'm illustrating two different techniques to preserve or pickle food. Let's talk about some of the differences between fermentation and pickling. The preserving liquid used in quick pickling or canning is vinegar, which is itself a fermented food. However, it's been distilled, so none of the probiotic content of that vinegar when it was first fermented still exists. So we're just using it strictly as a way to acidify and keep the food preserved. Whereas with fermentation, we're actually starting off with brine, which is salt and water, and during the fermentation process, the brine gets transformed into a more acidic solution. And that includes lactic acid, acetic acid, lots of different substances that the various microbes are creating. Now the environment, when we ferment, of course needs to be hygienic and clean. We want to use hot soapy water to clean all of our utensils and our fermenting gear. But it doesn't have to go to that step that quick pickling and canning does, which is you really need to sterilize and sanitize everything that you're using in order to keep out any errant microbes. Because again, the strategy for quick pickling is we don't want any microbes because we want to keep the bad ones out. Another key difference between the two methods is that fermented foods are probiotic because again, we are cultivating a culture of bacteria. Whereas with canning or quick pickling, the idea is keep everybody out of the party. Fermentation also adds nutrients because during that process of these various bacteria living their lives, they create lots of new things, vitamins, digestive enzymes, etc. Whereas with canning or quick pickling, what you put in the jar is exactly what you're going to get out of it. As far as the relative speed of both methods, fermentation is a little bit slower, because fermentation generally happens at room temperature, or as I like to say, at the speed of nature. Whereas once you've sealed something up after you've quick pickled it, it's pretty much ready to go. So by and large, it's a faster process. I think the flavor of fermented foods is a lot more complex due to the fact that over the number of days or weeks or however long we're fermenting something, the microbes are doing their thing and various new compounds have been formed. The final difference between the two methods has to do with how shelf-stable they are. Quick pickled or canned foods, once they've been sealed up, are very shelf-stable. They will be completely preserved for years and years if you don't open them. Whereas fermented foods are not inherently shelf-stable at room temperature. And that's because at room temperature, they're doing their thing. They're actually actively fermenting. So fortunately, we have refrigerators. And so once we decide a fermented food has the right flavor and texture that we like, we simply move it to the refrigerator. The refrigerator acts as a fermentation super slow-mo, or maybe a fermentation pause button. That is, it hasn't killed the good bacteria that we just cultivated, but it makes them very docile and very lethargic. So things will continue to develop in the refrigerator, just very, very slowly.